irregardless of like what people think or what people say, I just started showing up as like 100% me. I showed up to seminars, I sat in the front row, I asked questions, I interrupted the speakers that came, I volunteered for committees. I started speaking up and talking to the dean about things that I thought needed to be changed. Like I wasn't sitting in the background anymore, just keeping my head down, trying to get through my graduate school education. I just felt like I really needed to be there 100%. And honestly, it felt like a relief.
All right, Monique has been eagerly awaiting in our green room with all of the lovely accommodations that we offer. So thank you for joining us, Monique. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to meet everyone and talk about my journey.
Yeah, this is going to be great. And just to give our audience a sense of what the sacrifice you made to be here today, tell them just what your last few days or last week has been like, because you've been literally across the country and back in a matter of just a few days, I think.
Yes, that's true. So I actually had a research talk on the East Coast. So I flew to Atlanta and then to Florida, and then I was back yesterday. And it's now 9 a.m. on the East Coast. A good morning, or from the West Coast. A good morning from California.
Good morning, good afternoon. So yeah, thank you, for getting up early with us. I see Eric Vaughn. He's joining us from SMD GEPA, and so is Elaine Smolak. Thank you both for commenting. Again, if you're watching and tuning in, we'd love to know where you're tuning in from. We typically get a worldwide audience for these. I'm not kidding. We get people from all over tuning in. It's great. And let us know how you're affiliated with the UofR. So we've got Francisca from Ghana. See, there we go. Thank you for tuning in, University of Cape Coast. Okay, let's dive in, Monique. So I gave a very almost a non-existent introduction. It was just your name, I think. But you are a postdoctoral scholar at Stanford University, but I know there's a lot more than that. So give us a sense of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so thank you again, Jeff, and everyone for the invitation. So, my name is Monique Mendes. I'm a postdoc fellow at Stanford University. I completed my Ph.D. in neuroscience at the University of Rochester School of Medicine, and I love neuroscience. I love glia, and I'm really excited to be here to give you just a perspective of how I got to this point in my career.
Yeah, so how did you become interested in neuroscience? Where did that all start?
So I've always loved science. I've always been interested in science. It goes all the way back to when I was in Jamaica. So I'm originally from Jamaica. I'm an immigrant. I'm a first generation student. And I remember going all the way back to prep school, elementary school, as you'd call it here. And I just was really fascinated with just how things work and biology around us. So I continued that love, and I had several people along the way that really fostered my love for science. And when I got to undergraduate at the University of Florida, I started working in a research lab in my second year at UF. And in this lab, we were interested in studying kind of the prophylactic treatments for stroke. So, how can we prevent stroke? And I've always been fascinated with the brain. There's just so many unanswered questions, and I was eager to just dive into this world after that research experience. So I decided to kind of move forward in that trajectory of pursuing a PhD in neuroscience.
And so you did your undergrad at University of Florida, and we've got some pictures there. You are throwing the cap in the air, and you actually you got accepted to graduate school at both UF and Rochester, and ultimately you decided on Rochester, clearly from this picture and what we're talking about today. So, what ultimately made you want to attend here?
So I'll start off by saying that it was a difficult decision. I know that sounds like people say that all the time, but I knew Florida. I grew up in Florida for several years. My family was there. My extended family was in Florida. My extended family was in Jamaica, which was only about an hour away flight. So, you know, I had comfort. I had home. I had people at University of Florida, especially faculty and my research advisor, that really wanted me to be successful and really wanted me to get to that next stage. And I interviewed at Rochester. I really loved it. And to bring back some context to that picture, my first time seeing snow ever in my entire life was during my interview. It like coming to Rochester. I've never seen snow. I was incredibly unprepared. I didn't have boots. I didn't have anything. I was kind of smiling to myself when I got off the bus, how excited I was to see snow, trying to hide my excitement. Um, but I decided that I really wanted to challenge myself. So I decided to go with Rochester. I really loved the environment. I loved the collaborative environment of Rochester. And I was eager to kind of widen my repertoire of skills and experience. So I decided to pack up my car um, with the three things I owned. And I took the auto train with my mom from Orlando to Virginia, and we drove the rest. And, it was scary, I'll be honest. And I know there's several people that are trying to make this decision of, do I stay home where I have family and I have this support system, or do I move to a completely different place with a different culture? And I have to say, I don't regret it. I think it was like the reason I'm here today is kind of making that really difficult decision.
Yeah, and let's now dive into just kind of your graduate school experience, what everything was kind of like while you were here in Rochester. And I watched a 2021 talk you gave for Black and Neuro, and you compared the graduate school experience as being a little bit like kindergarten, which was so funny. But when you were explaining, it was like, this is so true. Can you so talk a little bit about what you mean by that and your overall graduate school experience, and we'll hit on some more specifics around your accomplishments in a minute. But just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I started graduate school in, oh my goodness, 2015, 2016. And I'll be honest, I didn't know anything. I'll be very plain. I didn't know. I had a vague idea of what graduate school was supposed to be like, and it was going to be hard, but I really did not understand the scope of it at all. As I mentioned, I'm a first generation student. I wasn't around people that went to graduate school and had that experience to share with me. So in my last talk, I said it was kind of kindergarten because you're making friends, you're showing up to, like, you're meeting your teachers, your professors, you're trying to find a place to eat lunch. So when I when I say it's kind of like kindergarten, it's like you're starting over. And it was a challenging experience, but I think what I'm grateful for and what I enjoyed the most about Rochester was that I had several faculty members um, in neuroscience, outside of neuroscience, in the career center, that really I felt inside of me was really wanted me to succeed, like all in all, like just really genuinely wanted me to get to the next step and provided me with like the resources and the environment for me to thrive. And I think having that little sense of there are people in your corner and there are people that um, understand that you don't know everything that you need to know, but are willing to help you get to that next step was like just that little bit of support that I needed to be successful at Rochester, and successful in grad school.
And before we jump on to another grad school specific topic, let me just acknowledge a few more folks here. We have Caesar. I think you joined us last time. Thanks for tuning in. Aaron is a second year neuroscience graduate student program at the UofR, Aaron Murray. So thank you for joining. Raven Osborne is here tuning in from SMD. Today is her last day as a graduate student. Raven,
Yay!
congratulations. Yes, wishing you the best. And Abigail is watching from University of Rochester. She's a master's candidate. So thank you all again for tuning in. One thing I forgot to mention your sort of the year you graduated at the top. So you're a 2020 graduate of the Neuroscience Graduate Program. On top of that, the first Black woman to earn a Ph.D. in neuroscience from University of Rochester. So first, amazing. And second, what does it mean to be the first? You mentioned in some previous talks that there are rewards that come with that, as well as some challenges. And so what does it mean to be the first, and the responsibility that comes with that? Maybe start with the challenges, and then we'll talk about the rewards.
Ooh, that's a really good question. So yes, I am really grateful that I am the first Black woman to receive a PhD at Rochester, in neuroscience. I follow behind inspirational individuals like Dr. Nathan Smith, who was the first Black individual to receive a PhD in neuroscience, who's paving the way for all of us now and back at Rochester doing amazing things. Um, I I want to start off by saying I feel grateful for the opportunity to be the first, but I also feel a real sense of responsibility and pride, but also I feel a bit sometimes overwhelmed, because I feel like I have to kind of be there for several people that are starting this journey. And I get several emails, once or twice a month of graduate students who are, um, deciding to start something new, either at Rochester or at another institution. And I have to keep in mind that my experience and my perspective was really different, but I like to give people a very wide perspective of graduate school and to be open that everyone will approach it differently. So I try to keep that in mind, when I say I feel like a sense of responsibility, like I really want to help. So I I think that's my biggest challenge, and also I think continuing to pursue my passion, which is prioritizing women and individuals that are underrepresented in science, that can be a toll, because my ultimate goal is to become an independent researcher, but I also eagerly try to find the time to prioritize diversity inclusion, efforts, wherever I go. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of sort of paving the way and offering your help to those that kind of following in the same footsteps. Um, you've talked a bit before about just certain things that you know were difficult for you in going through grad school. It's part of that being, you were sort of hesitant to share or be open about your culture, your Jamaican culture. And I'm sure there, are others out there that may have difficulty expressing who they really are, and maybe lack a little bit of confidence. Shyness and lack of confidence is something you also mentioned that kind of goes into that. Any advice you can provide to maybe other represented scientists watching or listening to this that may be struggling with something like that as well?
Yeah, so thank you, Jeff. These are questions that are like really hitting it. um let me see. So I I want to, yeah, I do agree, and I did mention that, and I want to say that initially I did feel when I started grad school that I had to conceal like my accent, for example. Like I had a
Hmm.
very thick Jamaican accent. I grew up in Florida where there was a huge Jamaican population. My mom and my grandma still speak patois. And, you know, it comes here and there for me, but I felt sometimes that I had to really kind of cover up my accent and my mannerisms to be successful in science. And now I kind of feel like I've lost my accent a little bit and I kind of regret doing that. Um, but um I don't know when it clicked for me that I started to be just unapologetically myself, you know, irregardless of like what people think or what people say. I just started showing up as like 100% me. And when I say like me, like I showed up to seminars, I sat in the front row, I asked questions. I interrupted the speakers that came to visit for, for Rochester in the neuroscience department. Um, I volunteered for committees. I started speaking up and talking to the dean about things that I thought were like needed to be changed. Like I wasn't like sitting in the background anymore, just keeping my head down, trying to get through my graduate school education. I just felt like I really needed to be there 100%. And honestly, it felt like a relief. And what I realized the most, especially from my colleagues and like faculty around me, and I know everyone else will have a different experience, but in my experience, I realized that those around me really appreciated that more of me just showing up as myself and just, you know, being me and saying what I wanted to say and, you know, talking about Jamaica as much as I wanted. And um, I think that really helped me. And I think if there are other underrepresented scientists, women, Black women in science, and have this similar experience, I would say to them first, be kind to themselves and take it in strides. I don't want to make it seem I'm doing um, this seminar that I have all the right answers because I really don't. I'm still figuring it out. I'll be completely honest. But I think being apologetically yourself and truly whatever that means in your respect is like so much more worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of still figuring it out, I want to have a chance to talk about your work at Stanford. You know, kind of pivoting a little bit to you decided to go the postdoc route after graduate school here. So one, I guess, you know, what made you want to go the route of a postdoc, and then just briefly touch on your work at Stanford now.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a postdoc, and I decided to kind of keep going. So my long-term goal is to be an independent academic scientist at a research institution, intensive institution. And I've wanted that since the beginning of grad school. That did not change. I'm really drawn to mentoring. I love being in the lab. I love starting a project from just the conception of like the scientific question, hypothesizing, and then doing those experiments. I'm in love with that process. And my motivation to answer like some of these questions or even to enter academia is to really answer complex like neuroscience questions that are fundamental to neuroscience and like the brain and Alzheimer's disease particularly. And right now at Stanford, I'm building on my dissertation work. So in my dissertation work, I was studying microglia, and now I'm interested in studying the early effects of elevated beta amyloid in Alzheimer's disease and how this alters dendritic spines, dynamics, and microglial dynamic process dynamics, and also the interactions of spines with microglia. So I'm really interested in studying the early earliest effects of just what's happening with the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease. So,
Awesome. And before we jump to the next question, I'm sorry, yeah, my next question, I want to mention I'm running out of questions, folks. So if you have any, please drop them in the comments section for Monique, and we'll be sure to answer those. So, yeah, if you have anything, let us know. Monique, just last couple things from me while we have a few minutes here. You've also talked before about, and this goes back to, kind of breaking out of a shell, and if you do have some sort of like imposter syndrome or lacking in confidence, getting out and presenting your work, going to conferences is one way to help with that. And can you talk about the importance of doing stuff like that, just kind of regularly presenting, going to conferences and meeting people? And I think I heard in a previous talk of yours, I mean, that kind of doing that kind of thing helped make that decision for you that neuroscience was where you wanted to head. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of all that?
yeah, so when I started grad school, I would say my experience presenting and even writing, doing scientific writing was really limited. Like maybe like I don't know, in the lab, writing in my lab book in undergrad, and then maybe presenting to like in a classroom setting. So I didn't feel like I had that like formal education. So I was learning as I like was going in grad school. And I think um, Elaine was really helpful with my writing, and Anya Mayeska, who's my advisor, that really got it from the bare bones kind of really bad place it was to like a good place where I'm able to like write really competitive grants and write manuscripts, which what I realize now looking back is that don't be too hard on yourself and take the time and practice and seek out help. And at first you come to grad school, you're thinking, oh, I should know this. And I'm really grateful that Rochester had these resources for me. And I hope these are still going for other graduate students that can help you kind of get to the next step. In terms of confidence, I think as yeah, I watched some of your other LinkedIn lives, and a lot of people talked about imposter syndrome, and I think it's something that affects all of us. And I think a combination of being a first generation student and also being like the first Black woman to receive a PhD contributed to those feelings of being an imposter. um and I'll be honest that what really I, I can't even put a finger on what it was, but I think it was a SFN kind of professional development talk where there was like a woman in neuroscience panel, and I cannot remember the name of the professor right now, but she said it like what helped her get over her imposter syndrome was realizing that she does not know everything, and she does not expect herself to know everything. And I think I kind of took that really to heart, and I think I walked into the next neuroscience seminar next time and was like, wow, I don't think everyone in this room expects me to know every single thing about every topic in neuroscience. And that's okay to ask questions and to, you know, question things and to be inquisitive about things that I don't know. And it's also okay to say I don't know, which I think a lot of people feel uncomfortable doing. So I think that helped build my confidence because I'm always eager to learn. And I'm always okay with the fact that I won't know everything. I hope that answered your question,
It
Jeff.
does, yeah. There, and I
I
remember
rambled.
there's a great graphic that out there that as far as imposter syndrome, that's it's got like two circles, and it's like what you know we think we know is really small, and what we think everybody else knows is really big. And then
Right,
in reality, those are what we know, what everybody else knows is probably equal, very very much more equal than we think.
right.
Let's see. Sasha Kanta, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. I think we'll get back to you separately about your admission question. I think you know, what Monique might be able to help with here is, he's asking about how much GPA matters in graduate admission, and that's, like I said, we'll look at, I'll forward you some resources on what we have around admission. But as far as research, I mean, can you speak to a little bit about just gaining experience, and anything you did leading up to graduate school,
Right.
Monique, as far as gaining experience and sort of what helped you boost your application a little bit?
Yeah, so I'll start off by saying I did not have a 4.0 from undergrad to grad school. So I can't see the questions, but don't worry. I got into grad school, I made it to postdoc, and I had a great experience. Um, I I think, and I'm going back now, it's been several years, but when I went to my interview, I think professors were more interested in talking about my research experience and my next steps. So I think if you focus on that aspect, um, on every different graduate school and like admissions committee will be very different. But for neuroscience specifically, I was asked a lot of questions about just where I see myself in the next couple of years.
Mm,
What are the questions that I asked in undergrad? And to prepare for those questions, I made sure that when I was in undergrad, um, I did several projects. So I was a part of I would say two distinct projects, three distinct projects in undergraduate. First, I was working on adult stroke. Second, I was working on neonatal stroke questions. And then the last, I was working on another prophylactic approach to hemorrhagic stroke. So I had three separate stories that I could talk about that built on each other. And I think that really helped me have different perspectives, and I was able to answer questions about my career and also ask questions like critical, thoughtful questions about the work of the professors because I was introduced to like a little bit of science. And I think I'm trying to think back in undergrad if I did anything else. I did go to the annual biomedical research conference for minority students. It's a conference happens every year, and that really opened up my eyes to the different types of science and the different types of neuroscience. And I met several people, and it was a huge confidence booster as a junior going to this type of conference.
mm.
So I hope that answered your question.
I think so. Let us know, Sashikanta, if that was, if we were getting at your question there. And I'm glad you mentioned. Is that Abercam's you were talking about, Monique? That conference?
Yes, yes, Abercam.
Um, yeah, I know that's, something that's coming up here in a couple of months, and I'm glad you mentioned it because would just love to know. You hit on it a little bit, but can you explain it? Just talk a little bit about more about what that is and why it was so important for you to attend something like that.
Yeah, so the annual Abercams, as I mentioned, it's this huge conference, several different types of science disciplines are there, and they bring in judges who are faculty from all over the country. It's a fantastic recruitment uh, institution or conference, and I actually met Dr. Carrie O'Banion at this conference for Rochester. Just out of nowhere, I walked by Rochester's booth, and I don't think he remembers, but I remember talking to him that I'm thinking of applying. And I kind of tease him now, like later, that was the first time I met him. And it was a wonderful experience. I presented my work as a poster for the first time ever. This was even before grad school. It taught me how to talk about my science critically, how to answer questions. And I think what's really fantastic is that the judges give you really nice feedback. So you're able to kind of get a perspective on what are the next steps for your project. And you're able to also go to talks. Like that was my first time experiencing like going to a research talk and getting up and asking questions. And I think having that overall experience will give you a perspective of like what grad school is going to be like and academia in general because you don't really know what to expect, and that kind of opened my eyes like, yeah, I love conferences. they're exhausting. But I love like learning about science, cutting edge science that's not published yet, and ask questions about it. So I think that was a really important thing for me, and I encourage anyone that can go to this conference to go when they can.
Awesome. And we have, speaking of questions, let's see, we have another one here from Raven. And before I read it, remind folks, I think we have time for maybe a couple more. So if you have questions, again, please drop them in the comments. Raven Osborne asks, how different is the postdoc experience from being a graduate student?
Ooh, good question. Very different. I'll start there. I think what I what I liked about graduate school is that you had a series of goals that you had to achieve over time that were set, that um you met with your advisor, you talked about what your next steps are, and it's kind of unspoken that you'll be done in a certain amount of years and this is the project you'll be getting done. I think what postdoc is my perspective of postdoc is that it's really preparing you very early to be an independent researcher. And I think the transition, especially I started in the pandemic, was challenging. And I think it really owes to kind of put together a committee that you can meet with on a regular basis and have these open conversations with your mentor to kind of tell them what your next steps are. Because there's just a lot going on. I'll just be honest. And at this point in your life, also life is going on. And other things are happening outside of postdoc. So I think that is also a challenging part of it. I'm trying to think like big things that stand out to me for postdoc. I would say the independence portion of it is quite challenging, and time management, which is always a struggle that you're always trying to figure out how much time to put into research versus like other aspects. And then I think also making time to be a mentor, which is super important to me, was also challenging from the outset. And applying for grants and just making sure your work is moving forward. I hope that answered your question, Raven. I can chat more about it in general. And I think the biggest thing for me too was moving from the East Coast to the West Coast, a completely different culture, completely different environment, moving from a really small school as medium-sized school as Rochester and then to a really large institution like Stanford. Resources are bounteous. Like there's so many things you can do, so many questions you can ask. I think kind of keeping a tunnel vision and making sure you're achieving your goals, but also like broadening your repertoire of skills is like a very, challenging balance.
Well, thanks so much, Monique. I don't see any more questions in the feed here. I'll refresh one more time here in a second, but want to say thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, and for everything you're doing to, continue to make the sciences a more inclusive space. Love it. And if is there anything, if it's always, I don't want to say like, is there one piece of advice, but is there anything we didn't talk about that you want to talk about or hit on, or is there anything you want to leave us with?
Um, ooh, I'm like put on the spot. I'm just
Sorry about
kidding.
that. I know, brutal.
I think the biggest thing, it goes back to the hesitation of being yourself. I would say I would encourage people to just be, unapologetically themselves, especially underrepresented women and students and people in the neurosciences and sciences in these spaces. It gives yourself so much like relief. And I think that's the one piece of advice I would give to people that has really helped me kind of overcome like some of these big challenges of just like being me and whatever that means. And people like it or they don't like it.
And that's all right. Thank you so much, Monique. So again, folks, if you couldn't catch this live, or you had to leave early, or you missed the beginning, the whole thing's going to be available as a recording right after we stop this live stream here. So you can always come back to our pages and check it out. And keep posting questions if we didn't get to them today, or you think of one tomorrow that you really wanted to ask. Please post it, and we'll do our best to get back to you. But again, Monique, really, thank you so much for the time. This was wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the latest episode of the Next Step podcast. If you liked what you heard, please share with other members of the University of Rochester community, or anyone you think could benefit from these career stories. And we wish you nothing but the best in your own career journey. Until next time.